Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Crowdsourcing Sustainability Podcast. Today, we are lucky enough to be with Damon Gameau. Damon is an award-winning actor and director whose latest documentary, 2040, may be one of my favorite climate docs to date. With a touch of humor, great visuals, and highlighting people scaling up today's climate solutions, Damon paints a hopeful picture of what the world could be in 2040. A world that his 7-year-old daughter, Velvet, will someday inherit. The film has sparked an impressive impact campaign in its wake and led to Damon's recent nomination for New South Wales' Australian of the Year award for his work in the regeneration movement. So without further ado, Damon, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Ryan. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. So we'll be diving into the film, of course, the impact campaign that's been built around it, your thoughts on climate storytelling, and much more. I'd like to start by taking a step back and hearing more about your climate story, especially how it got started. So could you walk me through your climate journey? Like, when did you start caring about this, and what made you decide to work on climate?
Well, I remember reading, so Tim Flannery is a scientist in Australia. He's quite well known around the world. And he wrote a book called The Weather Makers in the late 1990s, actually. And it was the first sort of indication, I guess the first sort of mainstream novel that started to articulate this problem. And I remember reading it. I was in my 20s at the time, but I guess not giving it much weight. I started to understand the concepts at about a very basic level, but then sort of parked it as I tried to find my own place in the world and work out what I wanted to do and explore the various careers and tunnels and adventures that you go on in that stage of your life. And had always had this sense in the back of my mind that it was something I did deeply care about. Once I had children, I think that was then pushed to the fore. But I remember reading an article about a bleaching event on the Great Barrier Reef. It was 2016, and it was the third bleaching event that we'd had in a very short amount of time. And I got halfway through that article and then turned the page and started reading something else in the newspaper, but stopped myself and thought, why couldn't I finish that article? Here is something that I care about, and I have children, and it's about their future, and yet I couldn't connect with that subject. And so I started reading a little bit about the psychology around climate change and how it impacts our brains and the motivation and the complexity of who we are as human beings. And I just thought, wow, there's an opportunity here to try and offer up a different story or a different narrative to get people like myself more engaged than they are right now. And so I guess that started this pretty intense journey for me of, I would have spoken to more than 100 different academics and professors and scientists and futurists around the world to get a sense of the problem, so I understood what was actually going on, but then I could start to think about and research the things we could do about it. So
Right.
that was about a 6-year process up to now, really. But there was about a year of research before I even filmed anything with the film, just to give myself a quick, rapid homeschool of what's going on so that I could try and articulate it more clearly, I guess, or disseminate some of that quite jingoistic language when you think about it sometimes and put it into analogies or ways that parents, people, the layman, I guess, could understand. Because I do, or maybe we can get to this, is sometimes lament that this whole topic has been cased in a very political or scientific language and set of codes that really ostracizes 99% of humanity. So those scientists do an incredible job, but I think they need work, and they need the arts industry and filmmakers and other people to help them communicate it in a better way.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things that brought me to doing this work as well. I cared very deeply about the issue just because I saw it as for me, the realization was, if we don't get climate right, everything else is going to be wrong kind of thinking. And just felt like I had things to say in a way that I didn't hear anyone else talking about it in that way in the media, or, conversations with friends and family and that sort of stuff. So that definitely resonates deeply with me. And I think you kind of just touched on it there, but where did the idea specifically for 2040 come from? Can you walk us through sort of your thought processes behind it, and like what the germ of the idea was and how it evolved over time?
Well, I mean, I had been involved in the film industry for a long time, as an actor for a long time. And then I made my first documentary, which was called That Sugar Film. And that had a very big impact in Australia and around the world. And so I guess I saw the power and potency of storytelling, but also realized how subversive a lot of our narratives are in terms of betraying the real aspects of who we are as humans, our deep ability to connect, problem solve, come together, offer up hope, that really we'd succumb to very dystopian narratives in a whole range of areas, and particularly when it came to the future, that any future portrayed by Hollywood was, largely devoid of any nature, and full of robots and no humanity, and a really dark world.
Yeah.
And I thought, these are the images that we are planting into the subconscious of our children. And if we're not careful, we'll all collectively manifest that reality because it's the only one that we've seen. So I did feel like there was an opportunity, because I had a hunch that a lot of people didn't want that future for their children, that it didn't have to look like that. We could actually have the opposite of that and have a very functioning, flourishing world for humanity, and have nature right throughout our cities and eco corridors and growing food everywhere. And to throw that little pebble into the pond and see if it sort of had any resonance or ripple effect. So that was a big motivator. But also I spoke to an environmental psychologist, Dr. Renee Lertzman, who's in the States, and she really walked me through the neuroscience of how our brains are affected when we're only seeing, negative, fearful, anxiety-inducing information. It really does activate these parts of our brain, the limbic system, and when they're activated, we can't problem solve, or we can't think creatively because we're in that sort of fearful response. And I would say that the majority of humanity, when it comes to talking about climate change, just switch off straight away because of what it elicits in them, those feelings, a feeling of hopelessness, of fear, of, well, I can't do anything about it. So I just thought that there's got to be a way to motivate and bring people forth. And I'd read the work of Viktor Frankl, who talked about, man's need for hope to get through. I'd read about the Stockdale paradox, who was the admiral in Vietnam, who again had found this ability, this radical hope just to get through. And I thought, gee, there's something in this, that if we can tell a story about what lies on the other side of this crisis and really articulate to people the benefits of having more nature in our city, which drops the temperature, which reduces the fight and flight response in our brain, the benefits of healthy food that come from revitalized soils and whatnot. If we could tell those stories of gain rather than sacrifice and depravity, which is all pervasive as a narrative around climate change, we might bring more people along for the journey. So really that's my offering, and that's what I do now with my work in Regen Studios, which is a company I've founded now. We just tell stories that are designed to inspire and excite people about a better future we could build. And it might not be by 2040, it might be by 2100. But how do we move from an industrial civilization to an ecological civilization? That really excites me. Whether I'm around for the end result or not, that's what I want for my children and all their friends and their children, is a shot at living in a really beautiful, interconnected system that has nature at its very core.
I love that. I love that. It's so needed right now. So thank you. It actually makes me think of the Green New Deal and Project Drawdown. I know you spoke with Paul Hawken in the film, but I see it as this somewhat of a turning in climate storytelling and the narrative, where we're getting more voices talking about the solutions and how much better the world could be, and how this is really a win-win-win for people and the planet, and bringing people out of poverty and everything. So I love that.
Well, it's an interesting, especially given we're talking right now, only 12 hours really since the IPCC released their sixth assessment. And again, there's lots of different ways you can look at that. And I've even been looking at some of the reporting that's come out of the New York Times and other organizations. And it makes me just want to scream, because it's like, well, we've pretty much got no hope. It's runaway climate change. Like this doomsday nihilism is just so destructive for us as human beings. And it isn't true. Even the report itself says, yeah, absolutely, we're on track for 1.5 degrees in the next 20 years. But if we stop all our fossil fuels right now, if we have huge reforestation and soil health programs, we can keep it under that. So again, there's different ways of dealing with this report and reporting it that are so important. And there's a quote by Charles Kettering, who worked at Ford years ago, and he said that a problem well stated is a problem half solved. So what we have now is this incredibly robust and articulate scientific assessment of our problem. Great. We should absolutely celebrate that. We know exactly what's wrong and what's happening. But now that also creates a springboard for us to go, right, well, let's just roll our sleeves up and start solving this. Whereas if we're starting to talk about inevitability and collapse and runaway climate change, it just, people will shut off and they'll watch more Netflix and numb themselves on opiates and think, well, it's all doomed. Who cares anyway? And you know what? That is a narrative that has been perpetuated by the fossil fuel industry for the last 30 years. They know if they can get people feeling nihilistic, they won't become activists. They won't get involved and fight because they think it's all just too late. So we just have to be so careful and strategic with how we message in this moment. And again, this is what you're doing. This is what I'm trying to do. It's trying to present this as an opportunity. So many of us are unhappy with this system. Mental health, disease, obesity, climate collapse, species extinction, all these things are interconnected. We have a fundamentally flawed architecture of a system that is creating all these problems. Why can't we come together and say, none of us are happy with this, except a few billionaires and a few other people. Let's flip this on its head and actually create a system that works for all of us so that we can reinvigorate our communities again, integrate the living world, and actually leave this place in a better state than we found it. So that's the narrative we've got to put out there, that this is an exciting time, a remarkable time in the species of human beings where we get to flip a system on its head. And imagine historians 3 years from now looking back to this moment saying, imagine being alive then, at the start of this incredible journey where they transitioned to energy, their food, their agriculture, their transport, all these things changed. And those people were around for that time. Like, this is a gift if we can look at it that way.
It's so true. I'm in complete agreement. The question is, how do we amplify that? And I was going to ask you this later, but you led right into it. So do you have any specific advice for, just regular people who want to start talking about climate more because they haven't at all yet, or maybe they're already talking about it, but they're not getting the conversations they want exactly? Do you have any tips for speaking on this?
Well, I think talking about it is a great tip because it's something we don't do enough. We're all scared to have these conversations with people we love, with our family, on social media, because we can get blowback because not everyone understands the urgency of this moment. So I think conversations are really important, but not coming in with a belligerent activist energy, with actually humanizing this conversation and finding what it is that someone else that cares about deeply, because we all care about healthy food. We all care about clean skies and clean water and a future for our children. So it's just about being strategic with how you talk about it. But also, I think there's so much that can unite us right now, especially in your country, in the left and the right divide, is that really we are fighting each other when we should be fighting the system, because there are people controlling this and the mechanisms of our system that are robbing all of us. And I think it's important to understand that we actually all want community. We all crave more power in our local regions, yet we have a system that completely robs us of that. It is focused on global wealth, global extraction, bigger and better, more expansion, more growth. And so we're actually heavily taxing and over-regulating local businesses while we're giving a free ride to these transnational corporations and subsidizing them with our taxpayer money and not charging them any taxes. And so we have this enormous schism. So all of us should be uniting on that, whether we're social or environmental activists or just people who care about their own community. Because I think in your country, as you know, I'm sure, is that's been a huge part of the unrest, is this sense of communities being torn apart and jobs being taken away and decisions, really important decisions, being made from a transnational corporation or a parliament that's a long, long way away. So if we can get back to the local, that's something that we're all going to connect with, because that's all how we evolved. We had more control and understanding. We had more sovereignty around our food and our energy and our manufacturing. And that's the very thing we need to do to solve so many of the problems we're facing right now. We're not going to solve it by growing at 3% every year. And the economy is going to be 7 times bigger by 2100. 7 times. That's more plastic in the ocean, more destruction of forests, destroyed animals, like more gap in income inequality. It's madness. It's a suicide mission. So I think it's understanding the system so that we don't get caught in a fight with each other, which is exactly what the gatekeepers of this system want us to do. While we're bickering and tearing each other apart on social media, they're unraveling more regulations and creating more tax breaks for the wealthy. and we're ignorant to it. So I think that is a huge part of the problem here, is understanding the architecture and the engines of this machine that are causing all of these problems. And they're things that we can find agreement on and move forward on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the polling in the U.S. for a wealth tax, it's through the roof.
Yeah.
And this also makes me think of just how intertwined democracy reform is with climate
Yeah.
action, because these there's so many politicians who are completely corrupted by these big corporations, whether it's the fossil fuel industry or not. And so there's some very basic things that need to happen and be passed, at least in the US, I'm sure, in many other places as well.
Yeah. Same here. As we are as bad there here as you are there in terms of our polluted democracy. Yeah.
Yeah, because if the politicians aren't accountable to the people and they're just listening to the dollars, then you're starting from a place where things aren't going to go very well.
No, and also we have it. We've set up a system with such perverse incentives that it largely rewards psychopathic behaviour. It rewards someone who's willing to step all over someone and not show empathy. They often become a CEO or they become a president. This is
Totally shameless.
a really broken system when we're pushing that person to the top. Because if you look at even our hunter gatherer methods, that person was ostracized, sometimes killed or removed from the tribe because they understood how destabilizing that energy could be to a group collective. Yet we flipped that and we now reward that person. And what do you know? We have these people in a very concentrated, high level of power that are not making decisions that are beneficial to the greater whole. So, yes, you're right. These things are deeply intertwined. We can't just tinker around the edges and expect to solve our climate issue and then be fine. We will have huge elements of inequality, social disruption, fracturing of democracy, even if we lower our emissions. So these things can't be looked at through separate lenses. This is a full system reboot overhaul, which again is challenging, and no one has the answer. And if they do, they're kidding themselves. This is not the moment for a hero savior. We've done that. This is about the sangha, the group, finding an answer. And I think that's really important to remember, is that we can't rely on one person to pull this off. It's actually going to take a collective effort to come up, design new systems together, work out what that looks like, and then start to transition it. And it's going to be clunky, and there's going to be people that are hurt, and there's going to be a lot of unrest, but that's what it's going to take to get to a better world, because we've just done so much damage and we haven't acted fast enough, unfortunately.
Yep, 100%. So switching gears here, I want to get to the making of this film. Uh, what was that experience like for you? Like, what was it like to travel the world and talk to all these people about climate? And then I also would love to hear what it was like filming the kids and interacting with the kids, because that was one of my favorite parts, hearing their answers.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the whole journey for me has been quite transformative in that, so much of my fear and anxiety 6 years ago when I started, a lot of it has been alleviated. I mean, I still have moments where, of course, I'm, like the release of this report, I still have pangs of like, oh, there's so much to do. But I think when you are talking to these type of people every day, and these are people that don't get any coverage in the mainstream media, we hear very little about them. It's extraordinary how much is going on behind the scenes. And Rebecca Solnit talks about that, the hope in the dark, away from the main spotlight. It's the people in the shadows where the hope lies, because they're the ones getting things done. And that's what I've spent the last 6 years doing, is speaking to those people and communities or initiatives, and just the amount of creativity and ingenuity now that's going into this space is unbelievable, really, especially even in the last probably 18 months. So there is
Mm-hmm.
enormous reason for optimism. It doesn't, distract or shy away from the urgency of what's required. But I feel certainly more hopeful for humanity, than a grounded hope, a muscular hope, than I did 6 years ago. And that's because, narratives are so powerful, as we know, and the stories we tell ourselves shape our own lives and our interactions with everyone else. But the collective narrative we tell is also incredibly powerful. And most people are just swimming and drowning in this doomsday nihilistic narrative. Whereas I guess I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time with people that don't believe that and are not accepting that narrative, and they're finding a way to solve it. So I can categorically sit here with you right now and say that we've got everything we need to turn this around. We can grow enough seaweed, we can plant enough trees, we can rebuild our soil health, we can switch to renewables. We can do all that and actually have a beautiful functioning world, not just for humans, but for all ecology. Um, so that gets me up every day is to know that that's possible, and that drives me. And I guess I want more and more people to try and understand that and know that all is not lost. There's incredible amounts to do. And again, as you touched on, the children, I guess, it was kind of bittersweet because a lot of them were so deeply concerned about what we're doing and what's going on. And they were so articulate that a lot of that I didn't put in the film because I just thought it was, it was too painful. Some of it was just, some of them hadn't quite worked out exactly what was going on, but they had a feeling that something wasn't right, and they were able to share that. But I guess, as you've seen in the film, they're so creative, they're so open, they're so connected to nature still that the inertia of the system hasn't eroded that in them completely, that they just speak a lot of common sense. And so that's why I put them in the film, is that we do need to listen to them, because a lot of us have just, we've got buried in so many different narratives and stories, and we're so full of stuff that we forget the simplicity sometimes of what needs to be done. And those children can just articulate that really, really clearly. So that was a real joy. It was 120 kids in multiple countries, from Sweden to England to the Bronx to Africa. And they all shared very, very similar themes and similar concerns, and wanted similar outcomes around animals and trees and nature and electric cars. But so yeah, that gave me enormous hope. And I think for a lot of people that probably speak to those kids or interact with some of the kids in the climate strike movement, gosh, they're articulate and they're switched on and they're connected and they speak to each other all around the world very regularly, and they're learning so much about organizing and democracy aside from climate. They're learning about what it takes to make decisions together and listen and learn from each other. And I'm really in awe of a lot of those groups that we've spent a lot of time with. And once they get power, legitimate power, all sorts of things are going to unfold very quickly. So, we're not far from a tipping point. In fact, we might have already reached one. I'm not sure, or it's certainly the beginnings of one. But I think there's going to be a flurry of activity in the next 10 years. It's already starting now. And as we know, there are some things that we can't undo. We're going to have more melting ice. The seas are going to rise. We've got more ocean acidification. There's some things we can't undo, but we can stop a lot more damage by some of the actions we take in the next 10 years. And yeah, I think we're going to see some huge changes in the decade ahead.
Yeah, that's reminds me of one of the things that I say a decent amount, which is like, climate change is so hard for us to, I think, truly grasp the impacts of. So it's in many ways going to be worse than we expect in our lifetime. But at the same time, we're going to be acting on it so much faster than anyone thinks is possible. And so, like, we're limited in both directions of imagination. And I think that latter one, especially, we need to kind of waken up to, because as soon as this dam is broken, there's going to be, it's going to be impossible. It's already kind of hard to keep up with all the good things that are
Yeah, it is.
happening.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what that's going to look like in even just a couple of years, never mind 10. So as soon as that dam is broken and that tipping point is reached on the social side of things, we're going to have a lot more reason for hope, and it's going to be very exciting.
We are, and yeah, and you're right, and just think of all the jobs, like the billions of jobs that we can create if we are going to turn this around. And again, the narrative's all about automation and robots. The future, yeah, of course they're going to play a role, and a lot of those are probably going to do menial jobs that we don't want anyway. But the jobs we're going to need are cleaning up our cities, cleaning up our oceans, planting more trees, improving the food and soil health. Bringing animals back from extinction, like back from endangered lists and whatnot. I mean, this is work with incredible value and meaning that actually a lot of people want. And you see the stories of people that quit a job they're not happy with and they go and contribute in some meaningful way. The joy that it brings them. Again, that is just waiting for us in the decade ahead to really bring people back together and unite them on a common cause of regeneration and moving forward and leaving the planet in a better way for their kids. So again, we've just got to get these stories out there. We've got to make sure we sell this for the truth that it is and the opportunity that it is. And we haven't done that well enough up to now.
Yeah. Building on that, you focus a decent amount in the doc on donut economics. For anyone who's unfamiliar with that, could you give us a brief overview of what it is and why you included it? Like why? Because I find it extremely powerful, but I'd love to hear you explain it in your own words.
Yeah, so donut economics was developed by an English economist named Kate Raworth, and she is an absolute cracker of a human being, and still, getting huge traction with this concept right around the world. And basically, it puts some safe boundaries on an economic system that at the moment is based purely on, I guess, a linear, never-ending growth curve. So it says that we can just keep growing 3% a year, and that's what's good for the planet and good for humanity, but just takes into account none of the boundaries, the planetary, ecological, or social boundaries that we need to implement, whether that's overusing chemicals, destruction of our forests and land use, ocean acidification, climate change, let alone income inequality. If we cross those boundaries, and some of them we've already crossed, that's when we start to, A, destroy our living planet and our home, but also really fracture our democracies. So all she's doing is sort of saying, it's common sense, really. Why don't we put an outer boundary on the ecological boundary, so that if we do reach a point where we're cutting down too many trees that's going to affect or destabilize the Amazon, for example, an alarm goes off and we say, right, we can't do that anymore. We've got to stay within that boundary. And the same goes socially. If we reach a point where there's not enough healthcare, or income inequality reaches a point, or girls aren't getting enough education, that's destabilizing. Again, we put in a boundary that says, okay, we've got to pull that in. So it's basically a donut shape, and she's trying to get us to operate within that safe space of the donut where life can flourish and we can interact with our living world, and our communities are in balance, because there's not, someone with extraordinary amounts of wealth that's destroying it for everyone else. So it's very common sense, really. And I think it's a really smart, and that's why I put it in the film. It's a great logical first step to whatever new system we're going to build down the track that's fundamentally different in a lot of ways in our incentives and how we interact. And there's any number of theories about that, what that might look like. This, to me, felt like the fantastic next step of a transition, of reining in this unchecked hyper capitalism that we've developed now. That's absolutely, yes, it's brought benefits to a few people, but it's largely, we're seeing the impacts now of what this system's doing. So we need to rein it in some way. That's ideally what the role of the state and the market was supposed to do. They were supposed to be in balance. That's why we form a government, to keep those corporations in check. But what we've done is largely been so blinded by the 1984 narrative and go, we can't have this totalitarian big government, that we've let the Brave New World slip in the back door. And we've now got this absolute corporate totalitarianism as well, which is destroying our planet. So neither of those are ideal. I'm not saying that. We just need to find a balance between them, which is what the founding fathers and everyone else set up to do. And I guess that's what Kate's Donut says. It's like, well, let's bring that back into check, so that we've still got growth in certain areas that we know are going to help the planet. We've still got flourishing. Of course, we're still pulling people out of poverty. But if it gets to a point that we're absolutely destroying our own house, well, then what's the point of that? So, I searched long and hard to see what was the best system out there, and hers just stood up head and shoulders above anything else that was there and available right now. And as you probably know, or your listeners might know, they've already started to roll that out in Amsterdam. They've embraced the circle there, and there are jurisdictions right around the world now that are looking at it as a robust model for how they can move forward.
Yeah, I think it's pretty brilliant. Also, if anyone listening wants to do a deeper dive on the outer planetary boundaries, there's another doc that I watched recently called Breaking Boundaries with David Attenborough and
Johan Rockstrom.
I think Johan. Yeah. And that one's fantastic as well, although you might want to watch both docs at the same time, because that one's a bit of a downer.
But a lot of Kate's work is based on Johan's work there in terms of those planetary boundaries, and that's especially her outer boundaries are based on those, that we just can't breach those, and that's, if we do breach them, then we get runaway effects, and it affects our own life. So yeah, as you've just articulated, there's so much great work going on in this space. The fact that we can even talk about this, that film's out. Kate's work is well known. Is that awareness is starting to come through now, and people are starting to understand this and trying to find what they can do about it, or talk about it with their friends and get involved. Because I think, especially since COVID, since the Black Lives Matter riots, since climate change, since the fires in Australia, now in Greece, like, people are starting to see the interconnectedness of all this. These aren't just isolated incidents. we know that there's a deeply flawed system that we're operating under, and really smart minds and are starting to have this conversation. And that would have been radical 5 years ago, but it's not a radical conversation anymore. I think all of us intuitively know that we just can't keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. So feel free to repeat yourself a little bit here, but I'd love to hear again just how you think about storytelling as it relates to the climate crisis. And, you know, you gave some advice for regular people. I'd also love to hear your advice for, you know, the media, for journalists out there. Like I see this as the biggest story of our time. And in my mind, they're failing on this overall. I mean, you can find tons of examples of people doing great work, but by and large, the media has failed on this story so far.
Yeah, well, I think if we were living in a sane world, that IPCC report last night would have been live streamed to every living room. It would have been given the same coverage as the Olympics, and governments and businesses would have to outlay what their actions are today, or face some kind of sanction. So that's a sane world if people understood really the urgency of what's at stake here. I think this idea of story. I mean, I'm biased, but I think it is so crucial. In fact, probably the most crucial aspect to this whole element and problem, because all of us, if you think about, some of us might not even be aware, but we're all telling a story to ourselves. Every interaction you do, whether it's making toast in the morning or driving your car to work, if you actually stop and catch yourself, you are telling yourself a story about who you are, how you interact. Largely, it's a self-deprecating story, and one that isn't serving you. It's saying, well, I'm not good enough here, or I can't do that, or I'm scared of it. But that is a narrative that you're running. But collectively, humanity has one as well. And whether we know it or not, we're all kind of swimming in it. And it largely says that, well, we need to keep growing and we need to keep extracting, and nature is separate to us. And we're selfish, greedy human beings. And this is a system, and it's all about the individual, and there's no such thing as community. All these things have been cultured and have been told to us by other people, and we buy into it as a collective story. And I'm here to tell you that we can change it, and a lot of it is absolute nonsense. So the role of media, the role of storytellers, poets, artists, songwriters, musicians, has never been more important, because what their role is to shape culture. And then that culture decides what lives and dies, survives or thrives. So if we aren't telling better stories, then people are going to keep believing this story that they're told by mainstream narratives, and we're going to fly off the cliff and everything's going to fall apart. So there are countless examples through history of really deep understanding of ontology and storytelling, of different tribes, of like groups of explorers that first traveled to these islands in the South Pacific, where they landed and they just brought this story of the mainland with them, and they felled their trees and planted crops and overhunted their fish, and realized they couldn't survive doing that. And so as the new explorers came in, they told new stories to teach their ancestors down the line about how to respect nature, how to work with it, how to grow abundant crops. They wrote songs and created rituals and storytellings that made sure that they were sustainable. And that's exactly what we need to do right now, that we need to tell better stories, because we are social animals and we forget that. We are very malleable and adaptable. And countless studies show that if someone, is there to put out a fire with a bucket of water, someone next to them will grab a bucket of water and put out that fire. If someone puts solar panels on their roof, the chances of the neighbors in the street putting solar panels go up exponentially, because we're constantly sending social cues to each other about how to behave and what the norm is. So we can flip our collective story very, very quickly if enough media outlets start talking about this, if enough of our Hollywood filmmakers start telling better stories that aren't full of this dystopian crap future, that start telling stories about our real interconnected values of who we are as human beings, that yes, selfish and being greedy is a tiny trait, but the rest of us, actually, it's a miracle that we even get on each day and pass strangers and get on a plane with someone we don't even know who's flying the flight, but we just trust them. Like all around us, there are examples of how miraculous it is that we get on in the ways that we do. That they're the stories we need to start telling. And I hope that, in 20 or 30 years, our number one rating show, you think of something like The Survivor, which is a show about how a group of people outdo each other so that one can remain. Imagine the number one rating is a show about how 20 people work together to create a harmonious island so they can all exist. That's the Survivor, is all of us working together. Like, it's not the last person. That narrative is dead and gone. We can't have that anymore if we're going to get through this. So, storytelling, yep, whatever shape that is, come on, artists, big musicians. Where's the big commercial band now? Writing a song about climate, writing a song about system change. They were everywhere when I was younger, but they're not there now. They're homogenized. Everything has become a monoculture. And we need to bring back the diversity. We need our storytellers to be brave. And we are all storytellers. Anyone with a social media platform is a storyteller. So we need to be really strategic about what messaging we're putting out there right now. It couldn't be more important in this moment. We are in a code red moment for humanity, and we've got to tell better stories and not fight each other, but fight the system and fight for a better world.
That is so well said. Uh, what is the story that you tell to Velvet?
Yeah, so it's
So also, sorry, just to back up, this is Damon's daughter who's 7 years old, in case anyone doesn't know. And I'm just asking this because I'm sure parents all over the place are trying to figure out how do you talk about this, and you've put a lot of thought into this, I'm sure. So
yeah, so I'm honest with her to a point. I let her know what is happening and what we're doing to the planet, and she's aware. She's learning it at school. That she comes home and tells me things that I didn't know. But I also make sure that I, in equal measure, give her a dosing of all the extraordinary things that people are doing and the solutions that they're coming up with, and
yeah,
how interconnected our world is, and show her films like Fantastic Fungi or 2040, or things that really expand her mind and retain her deep love of the natural world, because all our kids have that. And if they do love it and they do understand the magic of it, and let's be honest, the more you learn about trees sharing nutrients and supporting each other, and the fungi under the soil and what that does, it is magic. And if we can tell our kids those stories, then they'll value it. It has meaning, so they'll fight for it and they'll want to defend it. And that's largely the problem with my generation and older. We've severed that magic and that connection to the natural world. That story we've told has been that we're better than it, we're superior, it's extractive, it's lifeless, we can commodify it. So we need to pull that story back in and teach a new one to our kids and make sure they do understand how part of the natural world they are and how magical it is. So that conversation, every day, it's a balance between those two. But I think the role of parents and teachers, again, we talk about storytellers, but gosh, what a responsibility right now, and a role that parents have, that um, so many older generations, we're not going to change them now. They're set in their ways, and that's understandable to a degree. But our kids, they really have an opportunity. And I, what gives us the most pride, the most pride is like the curriculum materials that we develop for 2040. We've had, over 1.5 million kids have been taught those materials, and
wow,
the feedback we get from them, the inventions, the creativity, the excitement about their careers of the future in engineering to build giant seaweed farms, or microgrids that can connect, or driverless car, whatever it might be. What's sparked in them is so extraordinary. So if we keep telling them the negativity, if we keep telling them the doomsday narrative, they're going to shut down, and they're not going to activate that curiosity and that ingenuity in them. We've got to get them excited by their careers of the future, careers that will regenerate landscapes or communities and whatnot, because they want to do it and they're excited by it. They just don't know what's possible. So I'd encourage any teacher that's listening, or parent, to make sure you're also showing your kids that, and getting them excited about the possibilities of what they could be involved with when they grow up. Because they're out there, and there's people already doing it, and there's kids already doing it. And if they can connect with those people and those children, then that will alleviate a huge amount of their eco-anxiety. It's probably the number one thing you can do for a child that's feeling that, is to get them active and involved. And whether it's at their school, get the food waste system going, get the solar on the school, whatever it might be, get them to learn the governance structures on that micro level, which will really well equip them to then expand and know what they can do in the broader community. So that's how I talk to my daughter. Get involved. She's already puts up signs around her school about protecting trees, and and then come home and says, well, it's funny, Dad, because the boys rip down those signs. It's not easy being an activist for nature sometimes, is it? It's like, well, no, that's good. You're getting that lesson even now. But eventually, as Paul Hawken, I speak to Paul all the time, he says this, that, climate change will be the number one movement in human history eventually because of the weather. That, as we saw last night, we're on track for 1.5 degrees in the next 20 years. That's more catastrophic fires, more intense downpours and flooding. Like, people will eventually get it, even those that are on the fence right now, that it's inevitable that this will become a movement that unites us all, because our planet will become less and less habitable in certain areas. So may as well get in line now. May as well get your kids on board now and get them involved, not to scare them, but to share with them the possibilities of what we could do to turn it around.
Yeah, that is great advice. Could you talk a little bit more and build on that, on the impact campaign and the community that has grown around this documentary? Like, do you have any favorite stories, or just what are some of the high level things that you think of, or that you're like excited to see happening?
Yeah, I guess it was born of um, loving documentaries and being a big fan of them, but often feeling a really rich or strong emotion at the end of them, whether it's anger or frustration or hope or excitement, and then having nothing to do with that emotion. And 10 minutes later, kind of letting it dissipate, and being back on social media or talking to friends and going, oh, and realizing that is a unique moment when that emotion is at its purest, to try and funnel people to get them to use it. So we sort of did that in a soft way with the sugar film, and just had this extraordinary reaction from teachers and people. And you could download an app and count sugar in your food and audit your own pantry and all sorts of things. And we just saw the response to that really wanted to do something like that for this, and send people to activate their own action plan. And we developed one where you basically get asked a series of questions about what you're passionate about. So we're not being prescriptive to everyone saying, ride your bike to work or change your light bulb, because not everyone can do that or wants to do that. So it was really tailor-made for an individual based on where they're at financially, how much time they have available, and what their interests were that were aligned. And then we just had an extraordinary response to that, of people signing up. And then we teamed up with about 50 different organizations to then send them off to certain areas that align with their values. And, we had crowdfunding campaigns, equity crowdfund campaigns. So we raised $1 million in 3 weeks to build a microgrid. We raised
Wow.
$1.2 million to build the first seaweed platform down in Tasmania, which is being built as we speak. All the curriculum materials, people are mentoring girls online once a week. Like, just extraordinary. And to me, it speaks volumes to the willingness for people to get involved and act, but the dearth of opportunities that they have to get involved. So that we really need to ramp up that sort of active content. No more passive content anymore. If you're going to tell a story, make sure you're sending people to where they can get involved. And as part of, I've been working with Paul Hawken, whose new book Regeneration is about to come out. We're building a whole platform called the Regenerators, which is all about telling stories of people that are doing great things around the world. But there's a very robust impact campaign with that, including this climate action system, which is developed by a group in America and in Israel. And it's like a social action, so like social media, but at the next level up, an evolved, mature, adult platform, which is all linking people who are doing action around the world. And you sign up and share tips and advice, and you get notifications on your phone of when a petition's about to be signed or a tree planting thing, whatever it might be. It's just this coordinated network of people that are doing things that you can go on there. You can even observe as a guest and just go, whoa, this is happening. Wow, look at what these people are achieving. And start to make those metrics visible so people can really feel like they're taking part and it's meaningful. And that's what's happened with the
Mm-hmm.
2040 community. They're just so involved because they can see it's working. And we keep showing them and sharing back with them all the achievements that they're doing. And we had, hundreds of people turn out on a blisteringly cold day a couple of weeks ago for a tree planting. So all the Facebook group, those people living in Victoria on the Facebook group that talk, all decided they wanted to meet each other. So they came together and did a huge tree planting, and the Facebook page came to life in real time, and these people planted trees, And so we just want to keep doing things like that because people are yearning for it. We're all craving face to face. We're all craving community interaction again, and something with a purpose and meaning. So I just think there's an opportunity, I think, for lots of films now. It's starting to happen to develop really clever impact campaigns that allow people to do something with that feeling at the end of the film. And we've certainly got some really robust evidence now that it can translate into really meaningful and tangible outcomes.
That is incredible. If someone's listening to this and they want to check it out, make their action plan, join this community, how do they do that?
So just go to whatsyour2040.com, whatsyour2040.com, and you'll see a button there that says, I think it asks you if you're seeing the film or not. And then it says activate your plan. And you just literally click on that button. And then we ask you some questions about who you are. And then you get funneled off into different directions. And then you get sent into the community groups. And then, we're about to modify this, but you can actually get sent into this larger network that's going to launch in October. Through Paul's website and through our website, the Regenerators. And that'll be the test ground to just, bring all these people into this interactive network so they can sign up, get a profile, and start taking action and learning about what they can do.
That's super exciting. And I'll throw that link in the show notes. And I've actually heard rumblings of this climate action system that you and Paul are throwing together. I've been in some conversations, so I'm very excited to see that launch.
Yeah, and look, it's mainly the work of Harry Lasker and another guy called Ilan Rosbat, and he's in Israel, and it's their brainchild, and it's been a couple of years of them credible software experts that speak in language that I don't understand, but what they've developed is a really interesting, simple, clear user interface that will evolve and emerge, and it's been designed like that, not to be perfect to begin with, but it fills me with so much hope when they take me through the steps, and I feel about what this could be and turn into in the next couple of years is quite extraordinary in terms of what it offers, and the interaction of it is just so rich and heartfelt and meaningful, and they've just got the best intentions with it. There's no financial obligation there. There's no centralized thought. They want it decentralized and free and just a network for people that can use, and that intention is just rippling through all of it, which is exactly what we need, and so refreshing. So fingers crossed that it does resonate in the way that I hope it will.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask what you're working on now. Is that your big project right now?
Yeah, that's taking up a lot of time, that platform, and obviously a piece of content just to sort of I guess articulate what regeneration means to people and put a line in the sand about defining that term so it doesn't get hijacked and bastardized like sustainability has been in other words that we know. And also we're working with Louis Sahoya, who did The Cove and Racing Extinction, and he's doing this projecting change. So we're making a few pieces that they're going to project onto the New York skyline in October, and that's going to be live streamed on YouTube and TED too, I think. And that's just like 3 1-hour pieces of content to really wake people up to what's going on and to the action we need to take and to the positivity. So they're using a lot of 2040's projections there, and the children that you connected with will be projected onto those skyscrapers, which will be really beautiful. And also a project I'm doing now called Regenerate Australia, which is I guess it's a vision for what Australia can be in 2030, but it's set as a news report in 2030, looking back at the decade that was. And I've used really well-known Australian newsreaders and journalists who are all really willing to read these stories of the future that they hope happen. And then I've used a lot of stock footage and recontextualized it to show the outcomes and how it would benefit communities and the ripple effects and landscapes changing and oceans getting healthy. So that it's a hopefully it's a sort of foray into a waveform world to try and bring it into a matter and a material world. It's a conjuring of another dimension that I hope when people watch they go, oh, this would be interesting, or let's do that. That'd be a great thing to happen. So again, just playing with story, playing with different form of trying to engage people and get them excited, and trying to manifest and bring to life a different pathway than we're on right now. So I'll let you know how that goes.
Absolutely. Yeah, please do keep me posted. I love that. Paint the picture of the world that you want to build and live in, and give people something to step towards.
Well, yeah, and what's extraordinary about that project is that an organisation's come on with a multi-million-dollar fund, so that when we take it to the communities, we're going to do like a 60-town tour around Australia, that there's this fund available. So if they see something in there that they love, we can go, great, you know what? Apply for the money right now to start building it. Here's 200 grand, here's 500,000, like go for it. Bring it to life. Yeah. Here's the opportunity. So it'll be very interesting to see what comes of that, and I guess the community discussions and agreement and people trying to find out what is best for their community. We're really trying to facilitate all that. So we're not imposing anything. We're just trying to let them come up with those decisions. But at least the film is going to spark the ideas and give them this array of different things, from community gardens to community batteries to land regeneration to eco corridors, all sorts of things, and then provide the funding for them to start building it. I guess with the caveat that they let us come and film and amplify their story and their process so that we can share it with other communities who might learn from them and do it themselves.
I love that. I'm so glad that is going to exist soon.
Well, the challenge would be regenerating America. That would be a very ambitious project for someone to take on, but
Oh
let's see.
gosh.
Hopefully, there's some learnings from Regenerate Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we're coming up on time here. I've got a few final wrap up questions for you. We'll see how quickly we can get through them. So I'm working on setting up a 2040 viewing for folks in the crowdsourcing sustainability community. Where else can people watch this documentary if they want to watch it? And for anyone who's listening and wants to host a showing
Yeah.
of 2040, where should they go?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, there is a screenings button there, and we've partnered with the distributor there in America, and so you can put it on wherever you want, your town hall and your school library, or your work office. It's very accessible that way. I think one of the networks bought it, CBS, actually, which was great. The CW network actually showed it live on prime time at Earth Day, which was a massive achievement and a real insight into how the behind the scenes narrative gatekeepers work there. Them trying to just get that film shown was a fantastic insight into how reluctant the commercial networks are to do anything about climate change. But to their credit, we had a couple of real champions who really fought for it and put it on there. So that's great. I think Amazon Prime have got it as well. And it's probably on YouTube for free now. I'd say there's often thousands of downloads that you can't keep up with. You try to stop them when the film's first being released, but then you just surrender to the inevitability of the BitTorrent, and so you could probably watch it anywhere, I guess, for free. But yeah, I'd really encourage a community screening because we provide sort of a toolkit there and a template. There's a corporate program. There's all sorts of other assets that people can use once they've screened the film, and it's been a massive hit with schools. The kids, because there are so many children in it, and because I made it in a way that's very playful and user friendly and very accessible, that really is quite a big hit from anywhere from 8 to 15-year-olds, they or even 19-year-olds. They really love it. So I'd encourage anyone listening to host a screening. It's always a good night and a robust conversation afterwards.
Awesome. And for anyone listening who wants to keep up with you and follow you online, where can they find you?
I don't have a lot of time, to be honest, to do. I don't have a lot of time to do it. So every now and again, I'll post something on Instagram or Facebook, but very, very rarely. But once this madness dies down, I'm in the edit right now for the Regenerate Australia, and then trying to get the piece done for the New York thing in October. I do post things every now and again. So yeah, just the usual channels. There's not many Damon Gameaus out there that have mimicked me or other people with that name, so I'm pretty easy to find.
Awesome. Well, yeah, definitely do stay focused. That is most important. You get done what you're working on. Last couple things here. What book or film do you recommend or gift to people the most?
Wow, the most. Oh, there's so many. A friend of mine just wrote a beautiful kids book, actually, called, got it in my bag here, With a Little Kelp from My Friends. And it's all about
Nice.
the history and the magic of seaweed and all what it can do for the planet and the benefits and whatnot. It's just a beautiful, talk about ingraining knowledge into a children. That one is really popular. I just finished reading, they're all just happy to be on my desk, this Recapture the Rapture, which is Jamie Wheel's book. I'm not sure if you've heard him, but this is really interesting because he talks about this doomsday narrative that's pervasive right now, that it's all too hard. Even the billionaires sort of wanting to explore space is a version of that says we can't save what we have here. Let's start exploring other planets, and to be really wary of that it can be, overwhelming and shut people down. And then Humankind, if people haven't read that one, that's just a really beautiful reshaping of who we are as human beings, not selfish and greedy, but actually deeply caring of each other. Patterning Instinct, Ministry of the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. If you want some fiction, that's a really interesting read. I try and just sort of drink up as much as I can in this space, and occasionally read. I'm reading Overstory right now to try and get some non-fiction in amongst all the dense, heavy information, because I forget sometimes that to tune myself up on the storytelling skills and not just be spouting statistics all the time, because that's the number one thing that shuts people off. Trying to encase it in narratives that are going to move people or make them listen a little more deeply.
Awesome. I was going to ask you earlier if you had read Humankind. I forget what it was you said specifically, but I was like, ooh, I think he read Humankind. I read that one
Yeah,
some months ago. That's brilliant.
it's beautiful, and it's something we've all intuited. He just articulated something I felt for years. It was like, no, like we are good people. Like, yeah, we've got some traits, but gosh, it's incredible that we just coexist with so many strangers every day, and we put trust in extraordinary amounts of people without realizing it. And so it was lovely to read that and to see the traction it got. That most people feel that, and again, it speaks to the stories we need to be telling, and the Hollywood stories and all those, those traits that we are perpetuating, and the definition of who we are, and all these reality shows where we're just pushing people to bicker and to show greed and to bring out the worst in us. That's not who we are. It's ridiculous, and yet they're the number one rating shows because we're forcing people into that state, and that's all being released now. People being, they deliberately choose the most psychopathic or the people that are most vulnerable because they're going to get great ratings. So again, it's all because of a system that's perverse incentives. Those companies need to make money and get the highest ratings, so they pick the worst in people to bring that out, and that's what we're swimming in. And it's not true. It's just not true.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a final call to action or message you'd like to share with folks who are listening?
I guess we touched on it before with the sense of opportunity, and really reframing this moment as an extraordinary time in our species. And I guess even on the back of the IPCC report last night, that this is the moment. Like, this is the time we have to find our agency. It's now or never in a lot of ways. And Robert Swan said that the greatest threat to the planet is the belief that someone else will save it. That we can't wait around for that person anymore. It's not going to be a president. It's not going to be an environmentalist. It's not going to be a young teenager. It's actually all of us. And that involves a conversation with a friend. It involves a new vote. It involves a purchase you make of solar panels or the type of foods you eat. All those things combined are the things that's going to get us through this. And so I guess just for people to understand their power in this moment, that you are far more powerful than you realize. And the planet needs you. So please step up.
That is the perfect note to end on. Uh, so, Damon, thank you again for coming on the show and all the incredibly important work that you're doing in the regeneration movement.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you for being a storyteller that's telling the important news stories.
Thanks, Damon. Take care.